It didn't end with a fight or raised voices. It started with my phone vibrating while nothing else in my life appeared to be moving. I was parked outside a supply warehouse, engine running, heater ticking as it warmed the cab. Same routine, same list, same quiet space before work officially began. I checked the message without any urgency, expecting a question about materials or a delivery delay. Instead, it was a screenshot. A Tinder profile. Her Tinder profile. The picture was newer than anything she'd ever sent me. Better lit, better framed, her hair styled in a way she never bothered with on weekdays. An open neckline she used to reserve for weddings or date nights. She said she was too tired for now. The smile wasn't the familiar one she gave me across the kitchen counter. This one was practiced, intentional, meant for someone who didn't know her yet. The bio sat beneath it, neat and confident. Recently single. 2 words, placed carefully, like they'd been rehearsed. I didn't feel shock right away. My body didn't react the way movies say it should. No heat, no panic, just a slow, hollow awareness spreading outward, as if something structural had quietly failed. The ring was still on my hand. Her lunch was still in the fridge at home. The mortgage payment was still scheduled to draft on Friday. I zoomed in on the photo, noticing details I shouldn't have missed: the angle, the exposure, the fact that someone had taken the time to make her look available. Not lost, not confused, available. I sat there longer than I meant to, phone resting against the steering wheel, realizing that while I was still inside my life, still dressed for it, still responsible for it, she had already stepped outside of it. Before that day, everything felt predictable in the way stable things do. Not exciting, not dramatic, just solid. I woke up early, worked long hours, came home tired but steady. The kind of tired that made sleep honest. The kind that came from responsibility, not escape. Our life ran on routines. Grocery shopping on Sundays. Bills paid on time. Coffee brewed the same way every morning. I carried most of that weight without ever naming it as weight. It was just what I did. I handled the mortgage, the insurance, the repairs, the planning. I made sure the floor stayed level even when the house creaked. She used to appreciate that. Or at least she said she did. Somewhere along the way, steady became a word she used like an insult. She talked about feeling stuck. About needing more movement, more stimulation, more of herself. I listened. I nodded. I told myself this was normal. People grow, marriages adjust. You don't panic every time something shifts. You adapt. So when she changed, I framed it generously. New clothes meant confidence. New interests meant growth. New distance meant independence. I told myself I was being supportive instead of honest. She stayed out later. Took more calls in the other room. Started talking about people I'd never met with a familiarity that felt earned somewhere else. But nothing was explosive. Nothing crossed a line I could point to. It all lived in the gray, where doubt feels petty and trust feels like maturity. I became the stable one by default. The reliable one. The man who didn't need attention because he already knew who he was. Or at least that's how it looked from the outside. Inside, I was doing quiet math. Tracking patterns without admitting it. Not because I suspected betrayal, but because something felt off in the way a structure feels off before it fails. Not broken, just stressed in the wrong places. I remember thinking that relationships don't usually end all at once. They thin out first. Conversations shorten. Touch becomes optional. Presence turns symbolic. But I didn't name that either. I told myself love wasn't loud. That commitment wasn't exciting. That boredom was just peace misunderstood. So I kept things running. I stayed consistent. I absorbed the silence and called it patience. I didn't realize I was carrying stability alone, while she was already learning how to live without it. After the screenshot, I didn't say anything. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not when she stood in the kitchen talking about traffic and plans like nothing had changed. I nodded where it made sense. Answered where required. Kept my voice even. If she noticed the difference, she didn't show it. What changed wasn't my behavior. It was my attention. I stopped filling in gaps for her. Stopped smoothing over inconsistencies before they finished forming. I let things land where they landed instead of rushing to explain them away. It felt less like suspicion and more like stepping back to see the full frame. Late replies started standing out. Not because they were late, but because they followed the same pattern. Always busy at the same hours. Always vague in the same places. Her phone lived face down now, like a habit she didn't realize she'd formed. When it buzzed, she checked it quickly and set it aside, eyes moving before her hands did. The explanations came prepackaged, reused, too clean, too efficient. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. I'd expected heat, panic, something dramatic. Instead, there was a cooling sensation, like clarity settling in. The emotional static faded and details sharpened. I started noticing what didn't require effort. Which stories she volunteered, which ones only appeared when asked. How her tone shifted when she talked about her day versus when she talked about the future. The way she spoke around things instead of through them. I wasn't hunting for proof. I was letting it present itself. There's a moment when you stop hoping to be wrong. When being right feels less threatening than being confused. That's where I landed. Not all at once, but steadily, like a weight lowering onto solid ground. I began to understand that confrontation wouldn't give me answers. It would only give her a chance to shape them. So I stayed quiet, neutral, present. Silence did more than questions ever could. I didn't withdraw affection out of spite. I simply stopped offering reassurance I no longer felt. The balance shifted. She filled the space with justifications I hadn't asked for. I listened without interrupting, cataloging patterns the way I'd learned to do at work, inputs, outputs, deviations. There was no single revelation. No dramatic click. Just the growing sense that the pieces were arranging themselves without my help. And once I saw that, I understood something important. This wasn't happening to me anymore. It was happening in front of me. At some point, the need to understand turned off. Not faded, not softened. It shut down cleanly, like a switch you didn't know was wired until the lights went out. I stopped searching for explanations that would let me stay comfortable. Stopped imagining conversations where she suddenly made sense of it all and we repaired something that was already gone. I stopped thinking in terms of us. That was the real break, not the screenshot, not the patterns, not the silence. But the moment I realized I was still working to preserve something she'd already replaced. I'd been treating the situation like a problem to solve, when it wasn't a problem at all. It was a decision, hers. I didn't check her phone. Not because I trusted her, but because I didn't need to. Whatever was there would only confirm what I already knew, and confirmation wouldn't change the outcome. It would only add noise. I didn't confront her either. I understood, suddenly, that confrontation assumes the other person still cares about your reaction. That they're invested in your approval, your forgiveness, your presence. She wasn't. If she had been, there wouldn't have been a profile. There wouldn't have been secrecy disguised as independence. That acceptance was quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic grief. No bargaining. Just a steady, internal reorganization. I began thinking less about how to fix things and more about how to stand correctly inside what was happening. Where to place my feet. How to stop leaning towards someone who wasn't there. I let go of the fantasy that loyalty could be negotiated back into place. The truth was simple enough to sit with once I stopped resisting it. She had already made a choice, and it wasn't me. Not the life we'd built. Not the stability I carried. Not the future we talked about like it was guaranteed. Chasing her wouldn't change that. Explaining myself wouldn't change that. Loving harder wouldn't reverse a decision made in private and announced to strangers. So I didn't chase. I redirected the energy instead. Inward, practical, quiet. I focused on what was mine to control and released everything else without ceremony. I slept better than I had in weeks. Ate without distraction. Thought clearly. There's a strange calm that comes when you stop arguing with reality. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel defeated. I felt finished trying. And once I accepted that, the rest stopped hurting in sharp ways. It dulled into something manageable. Something honest. I wasn't losing her anymore. I was simply no longer pretending she hadn't already left. I watched quietly. Not in the way people imagine. No lurking, no spying, no dramatic stakeouts. I stayed exactly where I'd always been. Present. Predictable. Easy to overlook. That was enough. She started getting ready differently for work nights. Slower. More deliberate. Clothes laid out earlier in the day. Showers taken with intention instead of routine. The mirror got more attention than it had in years. I noticed which outfits never appeared around me, only disappeared into the evening. When she left, the house felt unchanged. When she came back, it didn't. Scents told their own story. Not perfume, she was careful about that, but traces of places. Restaurants we never went to. Fabric softener from somewhere else. The faint, unfamiliar smell of another environment clinging to her jacket sleeves. I didn't react. I cataloged. Her stories stayed consistent in structure but flexible in detail. Same beginning, same ending. The middle adjusted depending on the day. That's how you know something is rehearsed. Truth doesn't need editing. I noticed how questions made her defensive, even neutral ones. How she volunteered explanations before I asked. How silence unsettled her more than accusation ever could. I let the silence do its work. Timestamps became interesting. Receipts left in pockets. Calendar entries that didn't line up with reality. Small things. Disposable things. But patterns form from repetition, not drama. I didn't rush. There was no urgency anymore. Once I accepted the outcome, the process didn't need speed. Facts accumulate on their own if you don't interrupt them. She grew more careless as I grew quieter. Confidence does that. People relax when they think they're unobserved. When they believe the role they assigned you is permanent. I stopped correcting her when she misremembered things. Stopped reminding her of shared plans she'd forgotten. If she was rewriting her life, I let her do it out loud. I wrote nothing down. I didn't need to. The truth stayed put without help. It arranged itself neatly, like items laid out on a workbench, each one confirming the next. What surprised me most wasn't what I learned about her. It was what I learned about myself. I could see clearly without anger. I could witness betrayal without chaos. Observation didn't weaken me, it steadied me. I wasn't waiting for proof anymore. I was simply allowing reality to finish speaking. Eventually, it stopped being just between us. Not emotionally, I was already past that, but structurally. The moment something breaks at the foundation level, you stop arguing about feelings and start checking load-bearing points. I shifted into that mindset without effort. It felt familiar, practical. I reviewed accounts the same way I reviewed timelines at work. Quietly, methodically, no assumptions, just numbers and access. What was joint? What wasn't? What moved automatically every month without conversation? I didn't freeze anything yet. I just needed to know where everything stood. Documents came next. Titles, insurance, beneficiaries, the things you never think about until they matter. My name appeared where it should. Her name appeared where it benefited her. And then there were places it didn't appear at all, places she'd made sure stayed invisible. I scheduled consultations the way I scheduled inspections. No drama. No rush, just clarity. I asked questions, listened, took notes. I didn't tell anyone my reasons beyond what was necessary. The fewer opinions involved, the cleaner the process stayed. What struck me wasn't how complicated it was. It was how overdue it felt. I realized how much of our life had been built on my assumption that we were aligned. Once that assumption disappeared, the rest became simple. Not easy, but simple. Lines either held or they didn't. She was building profiles I was never meant to see. I was building contingencies she never imagined I would need. Neither of us announced it. We were just operating in different realities that happened to share the same address. I stopped thinking of it as betrayal and started thinking of it as separation already in progress. Legal structures just hadn't caught up yet. The personal part was finished. This was logistics now. I didn't feel cold. I felt responsible. Whatever happened next needed to be clean. Accurate, ethical. I wasn't interested in leverage or exposure. I wanted stability on the other side of the fallout. A landing, not a crash. I didn't rush her out. I didn't threaten. I didn't warn. I just made sure that when the private finally became public, I wouldn't be standing in the debris wondering how it all got away from me. Preparation has a way of quieting fear. By the time she realized things were no longer just emotional, I was already operating somewhere beyond that. Where outcomes mattered more than explanations. And where control didn't require noise. She told me she needed space on a Wednesday night, standing in the doorway with her coat still on, keys in her hand like she wasn't sure whether she was leaving or waiting to be stopped. She said she was overwhelmed. That she felt disconnected. That she needed time in another city to clear her head. The words came out smooth, practiced, arranged in a way that suggested she'd rehearsed them without an audience. She made a point of adding that it wasn't about anyone else. I listened, nodded once, let her finish. There was a time when that sentence would have triggered questions. A tightening in my chest. A need to clarify, to correct, to pull the truth out by force. But that time had passed quietly, without ceremony. I didn't interrupt her. Silence has a way of making people keep talking. She filled it with reassurances she hadn't been asked to give. Promises she didn't need to make. Explanations aimed at a version of me that no longer existed. When she finally stopped, she looked at me carefully, like she was gauging damage. I said I understood. Not because I agreed, but because I did. I understood exactly what she was doing, why she was doing it, and what she expected from me in response. She expected resistance. She expected pain she could manage. Tears she could justify. Anger she could point to later as proof that leaving had been necessary. I gave her none of it. I asked one practical question: how long she planned to be gone. She hesitated, then gave a range instead of a date. That told me everything I needed to know. I told her to take what she needed. She blinked at that, recovered quickly, said thank you in a tone that suggested relief mixed with confusion. I didn't tell her what I knew. Didn't mention profiles or timelines or preparations. This wasn't a negotiation, and it wasn't a trial. There was nothing to win by revealing my hand. I wasn't playing the role of the husband who begs. I wasn't playing any role at all. I walked her to the door, helped her carry a bag to the car, stood there while she explained again how hard this was for her. How guilty she felt, how much she hoped we could talk later. I told her to drive safe. She hugged me, briefly. I didn't lean in or pull away. Just stood there until it was done. As her car disappeared down the street, I felt something settle instead of break. The conversation hadn't changed anything. It had only confirmed that the decisions were already made, and that my silence had been the right one. After that, I barely had to act. Once she left, things began moving on their own, like a structure continuing to collapse after the final support is removed. No pushing, no interference, just gravity doing what it does. Her absence created space, not the dramatic kind, just room for processes to complete. I changed nothing at first. Same schedule, same routines. I let the house settle into quiet and listened to what that quiet revealed. Messages came less frequently, updates framed as courtesy instead of connection. She talked about the other city the way people talk about a temporary solution they're hoping becomes permanent. Always careful, always unfinished. I didn't respond right away. Not out of strategy, out of disinterest. The urgency was gone. I answered when necessary. Short, neutral, functional. Paperwork moved faster than I expected. Once initiated, it didn't require emotion, just accuracy. Signatures, verifications, waiting periods. The machinery of separation is efficient when you don't fight it. She came back once to collect more things. I wasn't home. That was intentional. I didn't want nostalgia turning into negotiation. I wanted the transfer to stay clean. Mutual acquaintances started adjusting without being told. Invitations stopped including both names. Conversations shifted tone. People sense fractures before they're announced. I didn't correct assumptions. She tried to reframe the situation through distance. Frustration crept into her messages. Confusion about why things felt so final when she hadn't said they were. I didn't explain. I had already said everything that mattered by saying very little. Deadlines arrived, passed. Decisions became defaults. The door closed not because I slammed it, but because I didn't hold it open anymore. There's a moment when absence becomes normal. When you realize you're not waiting for someone to return. That moment arrived quietly, on a night that felt like any other. I was sitting alone, reviewing documents when I noticed I hadn't checked my phone in hours. Not out of discipline, out of indifference. That's when I understood the truth most people miss. When you stop chasing, the outcome doesn't stall. It accelerates. She left. The paperwork finalized. The shared spaces emptied. Everything found its place without force. I didn't chase, and because of that, nothing dragged on. What ended did so cleanly. What remained was mine. Months passed before she reached out again. Not immediately. Not dramatically. It came the way uncertainty always does, softened by time, stripped of confidence. A message framed as casual, sent late in the evening, asking how I'd been. No apology. No accountability. Just a door tested gently, to see if it was still unlocked. I didn't respond right away. When I finally did, it was polite. Brief. Neutral. The tone you use with someone who used to know you well and no longer does. That opened the channel. She followed with another message a few days later. Then a call I didn't answer. Then a longer explanation that circled the truth without touching it. She talked about confusion, about mistakes, about how things hadn't turned out the way she expected. She didn't say she'd chosen wrong. She said things felt uncertain now. That distinction mattered. She asked if we could meet. Just to talk. No expectations. No pressure. She said she missed the steadiness. The clarity. The way things used to feel grounded. I understood what she was really asking. She wasn't coming back with a plan. She wasn't offering repair. She was checking whether I was still available as a fallback, whether the life she'd stepped away from was still paused where she left it. It wasn't. I told her no. Not sharply. Not defensively. Just no. I said I'd moved on. That I wished her well. That reopening things wouldn't be healthy for either of us. She pushed once more, gently. Said people make mistakes. Said time changes perspective. Said we didn't have to decide anything right away. That was when I stopped responding. I didn't block her. I didn't announce a boundary. I simply didn't engage. Silence finished what separation had started. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt resolved. There's a difference between closing a door and refusing to reopen it. One is reactive. The other is deliberate. I chose the latter. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things that hadn't fit before. Rest. Focus. Stability that didn't depend on someone else's uncertainty. I rebuilt slowly. Intentionally. Not just my schedule or my space, but my standards. I learned the difference between loyalty and tolerance. Between patience and self-erasure. When I thought about her later, it wasn't with anger. It was with clarity. She made a choice that felt right to her at the time. I made one that felt right to me. I didn't celebrate her absence. I simply didn't make room for her return. That was enough. She chose a Tinder stranger over our marriage. That sentence used to feel sharp when I thought about it. Heavy. Loaded. Now it just feels accurate. Like stating a fact without assigning it emotion it no longer deserves. I didn't chase her when she stepped away. I didn't compete with the version of herself she thought she needed to become. I didn't argue with a decision she made quietly and confirmed publicly. I let it end the way it was already ending. There's a strange dignity in not fighting to be chosen by someone who already decided otherwise. In refusing to audition for a role you once held by default. I didn't lose anything by walking away, I stopped losing. Life didn't explode afterward. It continued. Mornings arrived. Work got done. Meals were cooked. Stability returned, this time without effort or negotiation. I learned that peace doesn't announce itself. It settles in when the noise leaves. I wasn't angry in the end. I wasn't bitter. I was clear. I chose not to chase. Not to bargain. Not to remain available as a backup plan. And from that moment on, life moved forward, quietly, completely, and without her. That was the resolution. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just final.